He sat alone at the restaurant, staring at the two untouched glasses of water. The soft hum of conversation around him felt like static, distant and meaningless. He'd been here for over 30 minutes, pretending to check his phone, pretending not to care. Another failed blind date, he thought, the kind where hope fades quietly and dignity walks out first. The waiter passed by with a polite smile, asking if he wanted to order yet. He shook his head, his throat too tight to speak. He'd told himself this one would be different, that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running from the loneliness that had followed him since the accident. But as the clock ticked and her chair remained empty, that old ache came crawling back, familiar as regret. Just when he was about to stand and leave, a tiny voice broke through the silence. "My mommy's sorry she's late," said a little girl, no older than 6, clutching a worn teddy bear that had seen better days. Her hair was tied in uneven pigtails, her cheeks flushed from the cold outside. For a second, he just blinked, confused. Then he saw the woman rushing toward them, breathless, flushed, and apologetic. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, one hand on her chest as she caught her breath. "I had to drop her at my mom's, but she insisted on coming." He looked at her and forgot how to breathe. She wasn't what he expected. No fancy dress, no carefully painted smile, just a simple woman in a faded blue sweater, her eyes tired but kind, her hands trembling slightly as she helped her daughter into the chair. He smiled faintly, something in him cracking open, something he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know why, but he felt like he'd been waiting for them, not just her. The little girl looked at him curiously, her teddy propped on the table like an extra guest. "Mommy says you like stories," she said innocently. He laughed under his breath, the sound rusty from disuse. "I do," he said. "Do you have one for me?" The girl nodded seriously. Once upon a time, there was a sad man who forgot how to smile. But then he met a girl who gave him a new heart. Her mother blushed, whispering, "Lila, that's not appropriate." But he just smiled, warmth spreading through him. "It's okay," he said gently. "It's the best story I've heard all day." As the dinner went on, the tension faded like mist. She told him her name was Clara. She worked double shifts at a clinic, barely had time for herself, and had agreed to this blind date only because her best friend wouldn't stop insisting. He told her about his job, how he used to be an architect, how he stopped after losing someone close in an accident he blamed himself for. The words came easier than he expected, and when he looked up, her eyes weren't filled with pity. They were filled with understanding. Lila giggled when the waiter spilled a bit of water, and the sound made him laugh too. It was such a small thing, but it felt enormous, like breathing after being underwater too long. When dinner ended, he walked them to their car. Lila waved goodbye with her teddy bear, and Clara thanked him again, her smile hesitant but real. "I'm not very good at this," she admitted. "Neither am I," he said, smiling. "Maybe we'll learn together." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment it felt like the world stopped moving. That night, he couldn't sleep. He replayed the evening again and again, the way Lila's laughter echoed in the restaurant, the way Clara's eyes softened when he talked about his past. He hadn't told anyone about the accident in years. He hadn't wanted to. But somehow, sitting across from her, it hadn't felt like confession. It had felt like healing. The next morning, he found himself texting her before he could talk himself out of it. "I had a good time last night. Maybe we can meet again." The reply came a few minutes later. "We'd like that. Lila's already asking if you'll tell her another story." Days turned into weeks, and their lives began to intertwine in quiet, ordinary ways. He'd stop by the clinic to bring Clara coffee on her breaks. On weekends, they'd take Lila to the park, where she'd run ahead of them, shouting about the clouds that looked like dragons. One evening, after a long day, Clara fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder. He didn't move. He didn't dare. It had been years since someone trusted him enough to fall asleep beside him. He watched her breathe, slow and peaceful, and felt something shift inside, a fragile hope taking root. One rainy afternoon, Clara told him everything. How she'd lost her husband in a car crash 3 years ago. How she'd promised herself she'd never love again. He listened, silent, his heart breaking quietly at the familiar pain. When she finished, he took her hand and said, "You don't have to rush. I just want to be here." Tears filled her eyes, and she whispered, "I'm not ready to lose someone again." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then don't. I'm not going anywhere." Their love didn't bloom fast. It grew like dawn, slow, steady, inevitable. Lila started calling him her story friend. They built routines, pancakes on Sundays, bedtime stories on Tuesdays, laughter where silence used to live. He stopped seeing the ghosts of his past every time he closed his eyes. Instead, he saw them, the little girl who brought light into his life, and the woman who showed him that broken hearts can still beat strong. Months later, at the same restaurant where they first met, Lila ran ahead and shouted, "My mommy's not late today." The waiter laughed, remembering them. Clara sat down across from him, smiling softly. "This was where it started," she said. "Where everything changed." He nodded, his chest tight with emotion. "I came here expecting a date," he said. "But I found a family." She reached across the table, took his hand, and whispered, "Sometimes love shows up when you've stopped looking." As they ate, Lila hummed a tune, her teddy bear still sitting between them like a silent witness to their story. He realized then that redemption doesn't come in grand gestures or dramatic endings. It comes quietly, in the way someone holds your hand, in the way a child smiles at you like you've always belonged. It comes in the form of second chances, disguised as everyday moments. And as he looked at them, mother and daughter, laughter and love, he finally understood. The past wasn't something to erase. It was something to forgive, so he could finally begin again. Weeks passed, and what began as awkward dinners slowly turned into something deeper, something neither of them had planned for. Dinners turned into laughter, laughter into warmth, and warmth into quiet moments that felt like home. He found himself looking forward to their evenings together, to the soft chatter of Clara's voice and the innocent giggles of little Lila as she told stories about her teddy bear. He'd never imagined he could feel so comfortable again, not after everything he'd lost. There had been a time when he believed his heart had closed for good, locked away with the memories of his past. But now, each smile, each shared silence, was teaching him that broken things could still hold beauty. He learned that Clara was a widow, though she rarely spoke of it. The first time she mentioned her late husband, her voice trembled just slightly. "He was kind," she said quietly, staring down at her hands. "But life, it just stopped one day." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He understood that kind of loss, the one that leaves you half alive, walking through days like they're echoes of what used to be. She worked 2 jobs to keep things running, often leaving before dawn and coming home after dark. Yet, despite her exhaustion, she never forgot to smile when she saw her daughter. He admired that strength. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, steady, the kind of courage that rebuilds a life piece by piece without expecting applause. One evening, Clara invited him over for dinner. It was a small apartment, modest but full of warmth, drawings on the fridge, soft music in the background, the smell of home-cooked pasta filling the air. Lila danced around the room with her teddy bear, insisting they both wear paper crowns she'd made from colored paper. He played along, laughing as Lila placed the crooked crown on his head and declared him king of stories. Clara rolled her eyes affectionately. "She's obsessed with fairy tales," she said. He smiled. "Maybe because she's living in one." The moment he said it, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something tender, fragile, and real. Later that night, after dinner and stories, Lila fell asleep on his lap. Her tiny hand rested on his arm, her breathing soft and even. He felt a strange peace, one he hadn't felt in years. He looked at her sleeping face and whispered, "I never thought I'd get a family by accident." Clara, sitting beside him, looked at him with eyes that shimmered in the dim light. "It wasn't an accident," she said softly. "It was grace." He didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, really looked, and realized that she wasn't just someone he cared for, she was someone who had become a part of him without trying. She had entered his life not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with kindness and patience. She'd taught him that love wasn't always loud, sometimes, it was quiet enough to heal. After that night, everything changed in small but meaningful ways. He started showing up at the clinic with coffee when she worked late. She began leaving little notes for him, reminders to eat, to rest, to breathe. They never spoke of love directly, but it was there, in every glance, every shared moment, every unspoken promise. Lila started calling him Mr. Smile, because, as she said, he always looked happier when they were around. And maybe she was right. Because for the first time in years, he was learning to smile without forcing it. There were still hard days. Clara sometimes cried quietly when she thought no one was watching. The weight of her past still lingered, and there were nights when fear crept in, fear of losing again, of letting go. He understood, because he carried his own ghosts too. But instead of pulling away, they faced those moments together. When she cried, he held her. When he grew quiet, she didn't push him to talk. They simply stayed, side by side, letting time do what time does best, soften the sharp edges of pain. One evening, it rained heavily, and the power went out. They lit candles and sat on the floor, telling stories to keep Lila entertained. The little girl giggled when he pretended to be a dragon, blowing imaginary fire. Clara laughed too, the sound like music in the quiet room. When Lila finally fell asleep in her mother's arms, he whispered, "You're doing an incredible job, you know." Clara looked at him, eyes glistening in the candlelight. "Some days I feel like I'm barely surviving," she admitted. "But then I see her smile, and I think maybe that's enough." He nodded, his voice soft. "It's more than enough." Time passed gently, and their lives began to blend. He'd fix things around her apartment. She'd pack him lunch when he worked late. The three of them became a rhythm, a small, imperfect family that somehow made perfect sense. He found himself planning weekends, birthdays, small surprises. Not because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to. Because for the first time, he had something to look forward to. One Sunday morning, they went to the park. Lila ran ahead chasing butterflies while he and Clara sat on a bench, watching her with quiet smiles. The sun was warm, and the air smelled like hope. "You've changed," Clara said suddenly. "When I first met you, you looked like someone who'd forgotten how to live." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I had. But you reminded me." She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And what did I remind you of?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "That love doesn't fix you, it makes you want to be better." They sat there for a while, watching Lila twirl in the sunlight, her laughter echoing through the air. He thought about how strange life was, how redemption doesn't come wrapped in miracles but in people who show up quietly when you need them most. He thought about how he'd spent years trying to forget the past, only to realize that healing didn't mean erasing it. It meant building something beautiful from what was left of it. That night, as they tucked Lila into bed, she looked up at him sleepily and whispered, "You're my favorite person." His heart clenched, tears stinging his eyes. Clara smiled softly from the doorway, and in that moment, he understood that this was what real love looked like, not grand, not perfect, but true. The kind that stays even when the world falls apart. The kind that feels like coming home. As he turned off the light and watched Lila drift into dreams, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. He had spent so long searching for redemption, for forgiveness, for meaning. But now he realized, it had been right here all along. In laughter shared over dinner. In tears wiped away quietly. In the tiny hand that held his, and the woman whose love asked for nothing but honesty. He looked at them, the woman who taught him forgiveness, the child who taught him love, and knew that life had given him one more chance. Not to forget his past, but to write a new ending to it.